Hello and welcome to E-Expressions. I'm your host, Shelly Morrissette. Today, my guest is Jim Viola. He's owner of the brand design company, Damn Good Brand. We're going to discuss branding and small business ownership with Jim today, and he's got a wealth of experience with branding and with owning his own small business. So welcome, Jim. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to talk with us. Let's jump right in and discuss what I'll call branding secrets for a business. What are the biggest mistakes that you see people, clients or customers or even brands out there that you see people making? I mean, what are the mistakes that people are making with their branding?
One of the biggest challenges I see is kind of reverse engineering what a business is and having to start that process from scratch. So if they're just starting out and they're getting to it early enough, it's usually a bit better because they can determine what their mission is, what their values are, what their voice can be comfortably. And one of the big things is they have to ask themselves is whether or not they need a full-fledged brand or if they can get by with just a logo, and what's going to carry them through the first 3, 6, 12 months of a business. So there's a lot to consider. It depends where they are at. I've worked with a lot of companies that have done rebrands, and they've had pieces here and there. So they've had a lot of disconnect between what is working and what's not working, what some people feel their brand voice is, what other people's feel. Like there could be a challenge departmentally about what the company is, especially if the company started as like a startup with 2 or 3 people. I've had numerous occasions come up where we've had several people who have a different idea of what the company is and what it should, or where it should be going. And then there's also the challenge of where the actual business is. So looking objectively at that is always a challenge. I think that's one of the biggest ones, though. I'm happy to expand upon that or dive into a more specific answers, or if you want to move into another question.
Yeah, well, one thing I notice is when people are starting out, I work with a lot of startups and everything, and when they start out, they don't have a brand story. That's because a brand isn't human. And the thing is, there are humans behind the brand. And when you're starting out, you need to talk about those humans behind the brand. And they don't understand that a brand story can develop over years. As you said, there's a story afterwards. But when you're just starting out, you have to almost go with the story, and it's the people behind the brand. It's the humans, because a brand, when it's starting, it's just nothing. It's not alive. But it's like Jobs and Wozniak. The whole thing about Apple, when the brand started out, it was the story of 2 guys in a garage. It wasn't this, Apple thing. And whenever I'm talking with people, I always say, well, you've got to have this story. And the look and the feel has got to be the same, and it's got to be consistent. And besides not having a story, the big thing I see, and I'd like you to expand on this, is the mistake of not having the brand be consistent across everything, from look and feel, and voice, and everything.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I emphasize a lot in the early sales calls, like the introductory calls, especially during a rebrand. I used to do audits for businesses. I stopped them because I was getting them through referrals. And as much as I saw value in it, I didn't think that it was the most, maybe not best use of my time, but I think that I'm better at coming into a brand fresh from the start and working with people from the ground up. But looking at the business from like a brand audit by looking at everything that they've done can be very beneficial. And that's across social media, market, print and advertising, like print and web, and especially the website. And then that filters down to microcopy. Microcopy is really important in expressing your brand, rather than saying, like I said, it says something as simple as a button, like saying let's go or submit, can really determine like how the audience will resonate with what they're reading. So is it conversational in tone? Is it very business focused? Is it feel like any thought has been put into it, or does it just feel like you're just doing what you see and everyone else is doing that? So the consistency can come, yeah, it is a difficult thing, especially when you're talking about a business in an area like South Jersey, where I think is a unique case study in and of itself, because New Jersey itself is like North and South Jersey, and a lot of New York style businesses. The further north you get, I'd say north of Trenton, but down, I live in Cherry Hill, which is a pretty in business centered area. But I came from a very small town called Clayton, and it was basically a farmland 35 years ago, and the neighboring businesses didn't give thought to, if they weren't a retail or a chain, they were creating businesses that were very just put together. So you might, all right, one second, my dog. Okay, yeah, so businesses that were sort of put together with logos made by friends, messaging that was done on signs, handwritten, but like these things where these businesses actually became big or long lasting businesses, but never needed to be more than what they always were. And that in regards to, sometimes it's in regards to cost savings or something, but a great example would be all the different lawn care services around New Jersey. A great example would be all the different lawn care services around New Jersey. I've had friends reach out asking for me to do logos for them. I'm happy to do them, but then it's harder to build a brand around that when it's a lot of the same businesses doing a lot of the same competitive things. But then you've got some outliers where you've got a business that might be worth several millions of dollars and have a bigger brand budget, a marketing budget, we would probably call it. They'd be less concerned with the brand and more concerned with getting eyeballs on their pamphlets so they can make more sales. It's a lot of service driven industries in South Jersey. So just having that background and thinking about what the small business owner needs compared to what a corporate identity, like a corporation, would need, or a startup, something with some funding behind it that's going to be generating hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in revenue within the first few years. Very different approaches.
Okay, well, let's talk for a moment. You mentioned this. Let's talk about brand voice.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a big one on brand voice, because how you put the copy out, or the fonts you use, or the colors that you use, or whatever, it all has to be consistent. And people don't realize that. Font, copy, colors, the palettes that you use, all of that goes into brand voice. And for example, you might want to be stern, or you may want to be soft or friendly or protective or inspiring, or whatever it might be that you want to be. But you have to understand, when we're talking about that look and feel and that consistency, that the font has to agree, the color palette has to agree, the style of voice has to agree. Now, when you're doing your branding and everything, and you're working with clients, I know when you do a brand audit, you have to do that whole thing, and you try to see if all that is consistent. Do you ever have any pushback from clients or anything like that when you're talking about all that stuff being consistent?
In most cases, I've had clients tell me, we know our brand is inconsistent and all over the place, so they need a 30,000 foot view of what's actually happening. So I've had instances come up where people have spoken about, like, well, our copywriter wants to do it this way, and this usually is an internal political issue within a business that you sort of have to navigate around. Lots of different, if you ever have more than one stakeholder, you have more than one opinion to consider, and that's always a big challenge that is very unforeseen. And as a freelancer, I'm blessed to not have to deal with it every day, but I'm also someone who has to navigate those politics from afar and put things in the client's court. So I can say, this is what's happening across, let's say, your Facebook, your Twitter, and your print advertising all uses different language that all speaks to the same goal, but is all connecting differently. And there needs to be a consistency across the board, like you said. Should it be friendly, should it be conversational, should it be casual, should it be more serious? And it depends on the market 100% of the time. So who you're talking to is really important. A lot of the times people will do things quickly and they'll end up with something that feels very off brand unintentionally, and that's usually comes around when there's like a quick message to be had. A lot of the times it comes through in promotional material for holiday sales, I noticed, or just holiday events, or if it's some sort of a new marketing push, that's where you can get disconnect from the main brand message. It happened a lot when I worked at a company recently where we would pivot a lot because we were a young startup. So we would pivot from our target market being a certain type of customer to another type of customer every 3 months. And we ended up becoming very inconsistent. So we had to do a whole brand audit and make a lot of choices that could position us in a way that could talk to multiple different types of consumers. Mm-hmm. So it was very challenging in that regard. I think we did a good job. They ultimately had to move on from that again because the company changed again. That's another challenge with a startup, a small business, especially in the tech industry, where you will see a company start out one way and then pivot. And there's Silicon Valley, the great show on HBO, talks about this all the time. You do brand pivots, and I think a lot of the major tech companies did them, starting off Apple, Microsoft. I know they started one way and they pivot into something where they see emerging markets and opportunities. So one of the things that is a blessing and a curse as a freelancer is that you can create something really great brand and it could work for 3 months and then get
shot down,
or replaced just as quickly because there's any number of reasons. A change in a marketing director or a new product advertising they want to lean into. And digital products especially are difficult for this because a digital product in and of itself is an intangible thing. So it's hard to build a relationship with the customer unless you've got like the right time of kind of grassroots growth. Figma does it, is probably one of the best examples of a really strong brand where people love the brand so much that when they were bought by Adobe last year, it was all I could read about for like a month. It's like I couldn't log into anything without hearing about this Figma acquisition. And that's hard to do. That's something that takes time and a dedicated team on the product side as well as in the consumer side. And it really comes through in people's passion. You can't buy that. It really has to come through naturally and through good intention. I think it's people can tell when something is really worth their time and worth investing themselves in.
Yeah. Well, this is one thing I always used to push back with clients when we're talking about brand voice. I used to have to talk with clients all the time, and they would say, well, this is the message that we want. And I would look at them and I'd say, well, that may not be the message that your consumers want to hear. And they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, you have to understand that it's not about you. It's about your customer. And man, they look at you like they want to take you. I mean, they want to take you and they're like, you don't know anything about our brand. You're a little, smarty pants guy. We care about our customers. And I'm like, I'm just saying, we need to think about our voice, and we need to think about our target audience. And that's the voice we want to speak in. I mean, we're not trying to hurt the brand, but it's not about you. It's about your customers. And they're like, after they come down off the ceiling, I can have a better discussion with it. But that's one thing I used to always get in, not fights, but a little bit of agitation when I was talking with clients.
Yeah, and I think that again goes back to the investment of the person you're speaking with. If they've invested a lot of themselves and they feel like their personality is in the company and like their blood's in it, they're gonna be meeting you with greater resistance, even if they know they're hiring you to solve a problem and that you have a unique perspective, that's always going to be a challenge. And that comes down to brand loyalty, whether you're working in the company or if you're really engaged or like the company for some reason. I've experienced that as the lead designer at the last company I worked at. Any criticism I was met with, I mean, it did rub me the wrong way, and I tried to take it with a grain of salt and try to be receptive. But at one point, I also had several bosses of central owners of the company, and it was a lot to balance. So you kind of have to, I think, as the designer, or if you're a brand advocate, and in general anything, you need to keep everything at an arm's length, so you can't let it hurt you. It's sort of just a harsh truth. Like, you can love something with your whole heart, but it might hurt you in the end. So it's important, especially with business, to adapt a mentality where things could change, and that your investment really comes through in like how you communicate, how you develop your relationships with the people you're working with, because that's so much more stable and long-term. Like, it's a longer term approach to thinking about business in general. So what I've really tried to work in through my processes with designing and creating brands is, I'm okay with anything changing. And if you hate something that I present to you, just tell me. Like, honesty is the best process. Like, be honest, love it, hate it, what don't you like, what can we do to change it, and how can we get you to something that not only you'll love, but your consumer will speak to your consumer. I think a lot of the times I'm dealing with an interesting stir of ego, because it's a lot of solopreneurs, a lot of small business owners are like just by themselves, but a lot of partners too. You know, they think one thing, but the best clients are usually the ones that trust you. They come through, usually that mine come through referral. So there's a level of trust there from the person that they refer to by. So they're able to kind of take their hands off the wheel, let me drive for a little bit and show them what's possible. And then we kind of meet in the middle. There's a lot of collaboration in what I do, because I don't want, for that very reason, the personal investment of the business owner. I don't want to make anyone feel like they're inadequate in any way, or that what they've been doing isn't working due to any, I guess not ignorance, but
They don't know the customer.
sorry, yeah, exactly. I mean,
they may not know what the customer, is actually feeling. A lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm putting myself in this spot as well. A lot of entrepreneurs become so invested in the brand or the product or both that they don't want to be told that there are customers out there that need to hear a certain message a certain way, not like they want to hear it, but a different way. And sometimes I mean, when I would say have that conversation with clients, I'd always preface it by saying, I did this, I want to do it this way. If I do it wrong, I'll beg for forgiveness. But, let me just tell you what I see. And then if I'm wrong, I'll beg for forgiveness. But just let me please tell you what I think.
Yeah,
and usually they'll let you do that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So let's talk about, we've talked about voice, and we've talked about look, and we've talked about story. Let's talk about presence. And by presence, I mean everywhere that you're going to push the promotion, whether it be digital or traditional media. What I used to always tell clients about presence is, we're going to have presence in a lot of places, online, traditional media, all kinds of places, but we want to have everything consistent, and we don't want to have any gaps. So, and they would look at me and they'd say, well, what do you mean by gaps? I would say, well, I don't want to have the message over here in this space different than the message over here. And they would say, but we want to push it out to all of our, all the places that we can. I said, I know, I understand that, and I want to do it, but let's make sure that our presence is the same across all of our channels. And that was always a tough story. They would always push back on that. Do you have any things with that where it's a little bit there's a little bit of pushback?
One of the things I've been fortunate enough to experience is a lot of product design.
Okay.
Just working in product design and web design, especially, there's a lot of emphasis on rapid iteration and A/B testing. So being able to speak in the same marketing tone, like same tone, say you want to put out, say the goal is to promote a new feature on your product or just to get new users. Depends where you're on the funnel. Let's start at that. So it depends where you're at the funnel. If you're trying to reach people who've never heard about your business before, if you're talking to them on one social network, the language might be more appropriate to be more fun. Say if you're on TikTok, and the video content will need to be tailored towards a very younger demographics. Now, if your demographic skews older, you might be looking at social media sites like Facebook, or in some instances, Twitter, maybe parts of Reddit, but you have to find where your consumer is and talk to them, right? So depending on where your consumer is and where you're finding them, I think the best thing to do is to try different marketing language, but tweaked just so slightly that you can maybe see how one performs over the other. Email is a good example of this too. Probably the most talked about is what gets people to open an email, and then how does that language
Money.
yeah, like how does that language
Money.
talk to the consumer? Like I always open the emails from a couple websites that I've purchased from before, when they are like I buy a lot of typography, like a lot of fonts. So if someone hits me up with an email like 5 new fonts for the week, like, yeah, I'm probably going to click that. So it speaks to me directly, and that's speaking to the consumer. Like, what am I looking for? Free shit. So free stuff is great, or just inspiration or sales, and then being able to test on that, I think, is really important. Especially in this digital age, you've got to be able. That's Chat GPT is one of these things where it's spitting out lots of ideas all the time, so you can rapidly iterate and test. But you need to also make sure it's all funneling back to the same, like you said, core values and message, what your intent is, because you can't be too far. Like, you need to think of it sort of like an arc, and you can't go too far out where you start to miss your target tremendously. You can't be talking about clogs or sandals or shoes to tech people who need business solutions, right? So you need to factor those things in.
Well, one of the things I see is, as far as this, one of the secrets for, building a good brand design is, and this has changed dramatically since I've started. And there's 2 things. First of them is brand engagement. When I was starting out, oh gosh, in the 70s, in the early 70s, everything was top down. We pushed messages, and we pushed branding through television or print or whatever it was. And there was no engagement with the consumer at all. But today, everything is like a 2-way street, where you've got events, you've got customer feedback, you've got customers that can communicate directly with you through all types of things. And so today, I mean, whether it's DM or whatever it is, customers can communicate back with you. And so you've got to have this customer engagement when you're talking about, or brand engagement when you're talking about doing branding today. Now, I am not very good at that because I didn't grow up in this world. But as a professional that's doing that today, do you see that engagement back and forth as being important to the way you're doing your business? Because I'm out of the loop on that whole thing. Do you get involved in any of that sort of stuff, or do you think about it?
I can speak to customer journeys and what I see other businesses doing that I would expect to be a standard for brand engagement. Like, when I have a problem with a product that I've bought, if I can directly message them, I've directly gone to Twitter to see if they have a support line, for example. That's always really helpful. The more easy it is to talk to someone directly is really great. Me personally, as a brand, I mean, it's me. So I am always available to have a conversation and to kind of talk. So I think myself and my my brand is just me. I'm a person, like just me as a personality. So when what I can do is give you insights. If you were to say you had a 30, 40 person company and you were in a the the digital product space, and you made software for taxes or something like that, and it was like a small company, right? How say you have 20,000 active users, you need to have direct channels for them to be able to speak to someone. I think branding and a person's perspective of their branding is greatly strengthened by how accessible the company is to speak directly to the consumer, and how transparent they can be, and yeah, everything else is the details, like being courteous, going, like having a customer support line that goes out of the way to make sure the customer stays happy, can offer discounts when possible. Those things are like the standard, the things that you would get at a retail store in the 90s, just applied to a digital world where people don't leave the house, right? So not necessarily having a direct video call with someone, but I always prefer when I can use that little chat button on a website and speak directly to a consumer, not a bot with pre-programmed answers. That stuff usually infuriates me. So things like that, those little touches help, but those are also they're essential, but I think some people think that maybe they're luxuries in some way as well, because they're an added expense for a company that might have thin margins. So it depends. It depends where you want to put your investment. But I've seen some startups, with some of the best startups. Robinhood come to mind, before they had all their problems with the stock exchange. The past couple of years had really great communications, and some of the apps, financial apps like Acorns, things that companies that go out of their way to make the consumer experience better without asking anything more of the consumer, be it information or dollars. It always makes me feel better about them. So continually adding value and then making the consumer aware of that value I think is one of the best ways to build a strong brand.
Okay. All right. So I want to get into what I'm going to call elements. This is really in the weeds, but the people out there need to hear this. People that are entrepreneurs and starting up a business and starting up a brand. I have, I've always got my rule of thumbs for these types of things, but I'm not a design person. So when you're talking about designing a brand, I'm not a design person, but I'm gonna just tell you what my rule of thumbs are, and then on each of these elements, and then I want you to just elaborate about what you feel. And like I say, this is just for the people that are going to be listening, potential entrepreneurs and everything. And they're just my rule of thumbs. And the reason why I have rule of thumbs is because I'm not a designer, for crying out loud. I can't design a paper airplane. But anyway, let's talk for, these are elements and everything. So one of my rule of thumbs was a logo, and a logo should have no more than 2 colors. It should have 2 to 3 colors. And that was the rule of thumb that I always have. Do you believe that, or am I just stupid?
I believe that a logo should work in black and white first. All my logo design, the process starts with presentation of logos in black and white first and foremost. But that doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about colors. I think that the digital space has opened up an interesting avenue where the logo itself doesn't have to be a flat image anymore. And there was actually a company, this was years ago now, but it still speaks to it, is that a logo doesn't have to be thought of just in 2 dimensions anymore. Especially as we move into this world of VR, I can start to see us moving towards logos that are 3-dimensional and can be interacted with. But in essence, though, you're always going to need something that's going to have to work in 2D, because it's going to be viewed in 2D at some point. So right. Black and white is a must. It's an absolute must for it. And in conjunction with that, the details need to be simplified to the point that you can still get enough of the the logo at a small size. So you don't want to lose elements. You don't want hairline details getting lost when you get really small. And certain sizes, I always take a step back. You don't want it to look like a blob. My eyes are getting worse as I get older, so everything's starting to look like a blob. But the core, I guess you would say the core rule that I follow in logo designs, black and white to start, should work really small, should be identifiable as a small object, and it doesn't need to tell a viewer everything about your brand. It's an identifying mark for your business. It's not your business, it's not your brand. It's the mark that identifies your brand. So it doesn't need to be overly complicated, and it doesn't need to say everything you do. So it doesn't need to have a bunch of elements and a bunch of colors. And when you can get to those simple marks and get to the sort of like the essence of it, or if a logo can somehow convey a sense of movement or emotion, that's an added bonus. But colors really come in when you're talking about the brand, like the visual identity system. And that's where I see the most potential for the color expansion. So typically, I think if I were to show you there's like 12 most recent logos, they're probably all one color.
Why don't you do that?
I don't have, okay, so let's look at
Let's just look at a few. I mean, that'd be great.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's see.
Let's do that. Let's stop talking and let's just get visual on the whole thing.
All right, cool. Let's look at it. Let me pull this up real quick. I'll pull up my Dribble account. This is a good example of a wide, so I'll kind of be able to show you where I see the opportunities for colors to more colors to be incorporated within a design. Let me see if I can minimize this. Okay, so this is my Dribble account. This is where I just post single shots. My website's more about sales. So these are some of my most recent projects. I've been working within the cannabis industry a bit recently. So this is an example of the same logo in two different versions. So this is a more complicated version of it, and I'd say complicated. It's got blue, this pink color, the yellow color, and this background color is so yellow, blue, this dark green, and this orange perp. So 1, 2, 3, 4. White you could count as a color if you want, but I don't really typically. And then 5, the yellow. This isn't an official color. I was just playing around with some things. So this is an example of kind of a complicated logo, but it makes sense for the business because it's a new cannabis retailer. They've got a retail space and they're in a very competitive market. So a bit more of a complicated design like this can give them a lot of legs to stand out from their competitors. And what this also does is it gives us lots of different elements to pull out and use in the branding, advertising and marketing material as we need to. So like this repeating pattern back here is a cannabis leaf that I've just sort of designed this Art Deco pattern, but she's also really fun. And we've got plans to expand the brand to have several different characters, all of different ethnicities. So it's going to be something that is very inclusive. So this is a very inclusive brand. So we've got a lot of different colors, but then we've got this single color version that looks great, just one color on white. So this is really important that this match is very has a high contrast, but also high readability. And in most cases, we're not going to see her really small. We'll probably see her with the word Cloud9 locked up with her, but you still at a very small size can see that it's a beautiful young lady with flowers in her hair. So this is an example of a more complicated logo. But then in the flip side of that, I've got this logo for Kind Kush, where it's we call this a monoline logo design, where everything is locked up into this circle. The flower sits in the circle real nicely. There's this sunrise happening over top of this flower element, and then there's these 7-pointed star is a nice homage to the 7 points of a cannabis leaf. So then we're able to actually pull that off and use that as a secondary element down here in style guide, it's actually used as a as like the footer. So like this is where you see like the page number 3. So like being able to create logos that have, I call them responsive, but really they're visual identity systems. So they can be pulled apart and used in different ways. So we've got our full color version of the logo, and then our actual color wheel here of all the brand colors. This is all part of an essential to a style guide to understanding like how, like if I was going to make something for the client in the any sort of marketing, advertising, the business cards, stuff like that, or build out their website, this document is a really great starting point where like, okay, I know I can use an outline and it go with a trim. The typography should be very dialed, like simplified. It should feel almost minimalistic, but also earthy. And we're going to stick to 1 or 2 colors. So in a lot of ways, what you said, yeah, I agree with you. Like I think the contrast should be there. So all space is another great example. Two colors on black, and then there's an entire visual system that I've created where the all in space and the actual space bar change based on the background design. So that's really important. And then this Hollywood Pizza one, more complicated. This is a t-shirt design, but this one for Orbit City charging, nice stark. I like when things are stark and can stand out strongly against a single color. So to your point, 2 colors, but in another instance, for example, with growth sprints, we've got a brand that has a very retro vibe to it, has multiple colors, but then it breaks down, and it can really break down really well into just one color. You knock out all these tertiary colors, secondary colors, and then you've just got blue on this nice tan. So these can look really strong. Domain guard, 1 color on blue, but there is a full color version of it in the style guide. But really, in most instances, you're going to see it in white on a dark background, and that's usually my guiding principle is like, let's make sure it has a high contrast against both black or light and dark backgrounds. I'm looking for examples of maybe a more complicated one.
But you're using, I mean, like my rule of 2 to 3 colors.
It does come into play. In certain instances, it does, does require, like this one, for example, was just in terms of finding that vibe, like that sort of feeling to it. That's where color really comes into play. But that can also be conveyed through things like thick lines as well. Like that also gives you a feeling, a very strong feeling, it's simplified but iconic. You understand what you're looking at. Like these are for a park. So that the color really ultimately expands the brand and gives you greater context into what the business does. Whereas the logo mark itself, absolutely 1 to 2 colors max as an identifying mark.
Right.
And that should always be the case. This one, 5 colors, but if I drop it to 1, you're going to just see the black pen nibs. And I really love this logo. It never got used, but I really like that one. So
the other thing, other rule of thumb I have is like no more than 2 fonts. You've got a main font.
Yes.
And then you may have a secondary font, but no more than 2 fonts. And then with a color palette, I think we're talking more here when you're, besides just the logo, you're talking more about color palettes for, all types of promotion. And there you can have, you can have 4 colors or something like that. You may only have 1 color or 2 colors on the actual logo, but for a color palette, you may have four colors for your palette. But you always use those 4 colors, those same 4 colors, like this one right here.
Yeah.
You use the light blue against the gray, and you use that across all areas all channels where you're pushing out this message.
Right. And you don't want it to become the dominant color. You want it to stand as an accent and a pop of color against the dark background. So it becomes that more, it really stands out when you like less is more. So
right. I agree.
Yeah, that instance comes up a lot as well. The point about your fonts absolutely is, I agree with that. Whenever I'm putting together a logo like this. There's a couple examples here where these were some mood boards I was working on. I was using two typefaces, but really trying to get it to just one. It's like in this version. But I think what having multiple typefaces can do is give you a bit of a heritage quality, or a bit of an intentionally put together quality to it. So it really depends on, again, what you're the consumer, for example, like what they would be expecting. If you're creating a heritage brand, is probably going to be the one that does this the most, where it's meant to feel old fashioned, where they used to use 4 or 5 different typefaces because it's what the typesetter had. And it comes through tradition, where you wanted to stand out with an advertisement, and the typesetter had all their fonts, and that's what they had. So they tried to use different typefaces to use, like for copy, for display. You've got your so they call them H1s, H2s, H3s, and body copy. So like your main header, what's your primary typeface, your display typeface going to be, and then typefaces like outside of the logo are all, I feel, should be very legible in the corporate and identity branding side of things. Like you want to try to aim for the middle of the road, because you want people to be able to read more than anything. So you want to stay away from overly decorative fonts when you're putting together large copy, like bodies of copy. Presentations are really important as well. Make sure it's very legible. So I always try to include typefaces that are very clean, contemporary, designed for modern web, newer designs, because they're, for a long time, web fonts were converted from print fonts through poor scans, and then we had really weird typefaces for a long time, where like the E's would be like, everything just looked like garbage for a while. And then as screens got better and pixel density got tighter, the resolutions got crisper, and you were able to you started to see all the little mistakes with the typefaces. And this was especially true of logos too. Hermes was a good example of their and Johnny Walker. They had these logos that only ever existed in print, and they had been printed and printed and over and over and over again, and the core files all needed to be redrawn and be crispened up. And in some cases, people would just hit this trace button in an application, and you'd get this really shitty version of it, and it ends up with all these little like weird things. And it really is a craft to build a logo in the computer so that it looks clean and crisp, and is a true to form adaptation of the original one. So that's been especially true for older brands moving into the digital age. And we're talking now. I mean, I feel old, but I'm not. It's
You're not
really
that old.
started to come. No, I know, but I graduated college in 2009, and this was all really starting to pick up steam around then. Like all these things, like redrawing fonts, redrawing logos, so that they look good on social media. Like social media was starting to become really popular, so like businesses knew that their audiences were there, so they had to get in touch with them, and they needed to present themselves in a clean and consistent way, like we talked about. So like now we have these brand initiatives to modernize brands that only have ever existed in print before, and that's a huge undertaking. So yeah, being able to convey on screen what worked in print. I mean, those are timeless rules for design. They'll always be true. Something that reads good in black and white will read good in black and white on a screen.
Well,
in
let me
VR,
let me talk about one more element that, I mean, we've talked about logo, we've talked about fonts, we've talked about color, and this is the one that I always I don't struggle with it, but when I used to do a lot of branding work, I used to talk about a lot, and it's pattern and texture. And like the one today that I think about a lot is like Apple's brushed metal, designs on their laptops and computers and everything. I think that's a really good element. Or the Louis Vuitton, the texture and the logo, the way they have everything. Those are pattern and textures, and I think they're important. The thing is, I always struggle I always struggle with how to come up with a new pattern or texture when we're talking about branding for, you know, and maybe you know probably more than I do, but I just don't have any answers for that particular area. People say it's important, but I just can't figure it out in my brain. Do you have any ideas about that as a
I think,
branding expert?
yeah, I think when you're talking about textures, if we take the example of the laptops, the Apple laptops, they have a specific design to them for different reasons. I mean, I know the consumer expects certain level of quality and craftsmanship, and these are all laser cut, beautifully precision design machines, which is really great. So every piece feels very intentional down to every millimeter of spacing on the keyboard. So materials, what materials a business uses really depends on what's expected of the consumer and what's going to relate to them. I know, for example, the texture on a laptop is designed to also transmit heat really well. So computers get very hot. So that's an important feature. Like we don't want you don't want the metal to be super conductive like aluminum foil and burn the consumer. And you want it to also feel natural, so it or feel natural enough or feel comfortable enough that if you're working at it for a really long time, that it doesn't create oily spots. I mean, I've had some gaming laptops where I've had my hands rested on the keyboard right here, and you can't really see it without the thing closing, but after 10 minutes of playing, everything gets really oily, and then I'm constantly like, it just looks gross. What's nice about these all aluminum keyboards is you don't really get those stains. So like that's a design decision that's been made about appearance, and Apple cares very much about the appearance of their products. So it's the same could be said for a Louis Vuitton and a leather manufacturer or company that deals with leather, for example. You want to consider the consumer for the product. So if they're expecting something high end, if you're buying a Louis Vuitton bag, there's going to be a premium feel to that leather. And the same thing with any kind of product. The more expensive it is, I think the more expensive the materials should feel. Not necessarily they have to be expensive, but we bought a Theragun recently, and the entire thing has a lot of weight to it. And I'm always reminded of the line from the Jurassic Park movie where this little boy is playing with these binoculars, and a man turns to him and says, are they heavy? And the kid says, yeah. And he says, and they're expensive, put them away. So it's like there's a correlation between weight and material with the expenditure on it. Like whenever I buy a product, I can feel if it's cheap. I know it's cheap, so it's going to make me feel instinctively that I've made a choice to buy something cheap. And maybe this brand hasn't invested or doesn't have an investment, and I'm less likely to invest my money and self into something that they've not chosen to do. So that's, I think, why Apple has been so successful, right? With in so many ways, because they are so much a technology company and a systems company, and they've created an entire ecosystem that you're really buying into the ecosystem. If you get the phone, you got to get the laptop, you got to get the headphones. It all talks to each other. So they've purposely made the decision to make everything look and feel designed, even down to just using the very simple branding on their boxing, which the boxes look amazing when you feel them, because they'll go and they'll have a slightly raised texture to them, or they'll use a spot UV print, which like makes things a little glossy just on certain parts of like the box. And that might just be, you have this perfectly white, crisp, stark white box, as white as you can get, and then there's a printed picture of what the item is inside the box, and it's centered, you know exactly what it is, it's nice and minimal detailed, and then that image is also raised up just ever so slightly, and on top of being raised against the box, it's also a little glossy, and it feels nice and polished, and that reinforces the minimalist feeling, speaks to a very posh and luxurious lifestyle. And that's just might be that the times we're living in, where less is more. So adding in, it's the little details that really
I love my little,
that people get capture.
it feels so heavy, but it just feels so right, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I keep mine in a case. I never even hold my phone, but whenever I take it out, I'm like, this is a beautiful piece of
It's like
technology, and
sculpture.
it's beautiful. But I hate having it out because I feel if I drop it, it's going to crack. And I've dropped my phone, like everyone else. So I have a nice thick OtterBox on it, and it completely negates the elegant design. So while Apple has done a great job to create beautiful designs, they've also created something that you really need to protect, and that covers up the design, except for laptops. So laptops really, I don't have a case for mine, but you can get shields and caps and bags for them too. Everything just to keep it safe and secure when the design is important, but it often is covered up
Yeah.
because it's an investment. It's expensive. It's like, let's look how great this looks. Let's make sure we protect it by putting all this stuff on it. And then we'll spend a lot of money on a really expensive case. Like OtterBox is, I believe, one of the most premium cases, like mid-range premium cases you can get. So you spend $1,000 on a phone, and you're spending $65 on a piece of rubber to protect it.
That's what I've got.
Yeah.
I've got,
And they work great.
hey, it
So
works.
the
Works.
OtterBox, yeah, the OtterBox feels good in your hand because they got rubber grips on the side and then a hard plastic back. And then inside my newest one, it's actually like a rubber on top of the plastic. So I feel like my phone is in a cozy little spot. It's like it's not pressed up against the plastic. Any little micro movements aren't going to scratch it. So that's all really important too.
My whole phone it's a beautiful phone. And my whole phone, I've got the plastic on the front, and I've got the heavy duty, case, and I can't see the beautiful phone anymore, but I can see the front of it, but that's it. The rest of it is completely encased in something that's going to protect it because it's so beautiful. All right, I think we've hit the elements and everything. And now I want to turn to you as an entrepreneur. And I want to talk about, we've talked about all the things that you do and all the knowledge you have and all the work that you do. And we've seen examples and what you recommend. So let's talk about you as a creative entrepreneur. So in your day-to-day life as an entrepreneur, what are the challenges that you face? I mean, you want to do quality work. I can tell that you're very passionate about your work and everything. So what are the challenges that you face for doing your creative work?
Right now, the biggest challenge is finding the routine. Like I have a routine set up, but it's also always changing. So I watch my son full time during the day. My wife has a job and she works full time, and she is in the office 3 or 4 days a week. So I watch our son. He's 2, and he's very smart. He's very fun, and I want to play with him all the time. So there's this constant push and pull between playing and getting work done and making sure that his needs are met. So what I've been leaning into doing is finding windows to do things like this, have conversations, but also client calls, write emails. But really what I need is what I struggle with is finding stretches of time that allow me to get into the proper flow state and be able to crank out work that is good. Because I can work, but it would be very poorly done. So what I really need to do is I need time to be able to make bad design and then refine it into something that's good. So the biggest challenge I face right now is time. The second biggest challenge is probably, as a designer, as a freelancer, I get all my work through, like I'd say 99% of my work comes through referral. So maintaining relationships is really important. And one of the biggest things is being able to foster those as best as I can, when a lot of the time as a business owner, you've got to do it all. You've got to be, like you said earlier when we were talking, you've got to be able to communicate well, and you've got to communicate with the client. So you've got to be your own manager. So you've got to keep in touch and set expectations, and then you've got to meet those expectations. And right now, even as I'm talking about this, I have clients who are expecting things from me this week, and I'm going to have to write an email to them explaining that the timeline is probably going to be shifted a little bit. But earlier on, when I first had set these expectations, they were met with the expectation that these expectations might change. So like, this is like where I'm aiming for, and this is the best case scenario. And would you be okay if, if it did have to extend a few more days, would that be okay? Like, I'm going to try and get stuff done as quickly as possible, but to make sure we're comfortable, like your best case scenario is you get it Friday, worst case scenario is you get it Tuesday, but that is the worst case scenario. So luckily I'm in a position where my clients are all fantastic and I'm able to, that's what's great about being solopreneurs. I can fire the people that don't work well with me and keep like really try and foster those relationships that do work. So it's a challenge to keep up with everybody, because now I've been doing this for so long that I get inundated with the work that's in front of me, and I lose the forest for the trees a little bit. And then it like sometimes work slows down, and then I've got to do a whole outreach, not campaign, but it's a lot more outreach. So keeping up with multiple personalities, people, different industries is interesting and challenging. I have a client, from looking at my dribble, you can see I work with a lot of cannabis dispensaries right now. So learning about that industry has been a challenge, because there are certain restrictions about what you can and cannot show depending on the borough, like where they're actually being constructed. So some of them say you can't use the image of a marijuana leaf or reference marijuana in any way, which is okay. Well, how do we do that? So there's then there's also the challenge of working with different industries. So I also work with a lot of SEO companies. I say a lot, but I have SEO clients. I have clients that are in cybersecurity. I've worked in a lot of cybersecurity companies. I've worked with pharma clients. I actually have one client that's a farm. They raise pork. And then I've got a client. I recently worked with a company that was starting his own. It was like a gas station for electric cars. Basically, you go there, you plug your car, and you can go and get some refreshments and play some video games. I don't know what's happened with it, but that's like another example of something that's different than anything else. So there's always a new need, and I try to be flexible. So it's challenging but I like it a lot, because I don't like to do the same thing over and over again. If I just had to do cannabis logos forever, it would all start to kind of look the same, unless I can do things and have clients trust me enough where I can do something like that angel design I showed you with the motif behind her. Like, that was pretty dramatic and different than anything else, and especially different than the Kind Kush one. So like, the challenges arise in finding new ways to keep brands exciting, not only for the client, but for myself. So if I can get the client happy, then it usually starts with me being happy and excited, and I can sell them on that excitement. The passion of a client coming through gets me passionate and makes me want to do better work. So that's a huge driving factor.
Well, let me just, I mean, when I was just starting out with my company, I used to get, I don't want to say depressed, but I used to get I wasn't happy, because I like to do the work, the creative part of the work, but I felt like I had to do so many other things. I had to talk to clients all the time. I had to do, I had to talk to employees. I had to do, I had to do everything. And when you're a startup, it takes you away from the things that you love. I had to do sales. I had to do, employee relations, labor relations, hiring, firing, all that sort of stuff. And it took me away from what I really liked. And that's just one of the things that it's just one of the challenges of being an entrepreneur. I find that most entrepreneurs go into start their own business because they have a passion for something, or they have a huge interest in something. For you, it's that creative work where you want to get in the flow and do things. And you love that, and you want to do that, and you feel really good about it. But the thing is, you're the boss, and you've got to do all these other things. You got to hire the people. You've got to talk to the suppliers. You got to talk to the clients. You got to sell to the clients and everything. And that just, it doesn't upset me. It never upset me, but I always said, that's one of the challenges I've got as far as pushing my time and where I want to spend it and everything.
The hardest part is writing emails and doing sales when I have other things that I've signed on to and need to get done because there are different parts of the brain. But some things that have really helped me have been products that do a lot of the contract proposal and invoicing automatically, like to just turnkey at this point. So a program I use is called Hello Bonsai, and it's hellobonsai.com. And for $200 a year, I've got all my clients in there. I've been adding to it over time. They have a lot of templates for contracts. They have a fantastic system where you create the client, you input all their information, contact and name, then you create the proposal, and then you can email that to them, and they can click a button that says accept. And then once I get an email notification that they've accepted it, I can then generate a contract that includes all the terms of the proposal. I can e-sign it just by typing in my name. I can easily change pieces of the contract. I can duplicate them. I use a lot of the same ones over and over again, change a little bit of verbiage here and there. And then once that's done, it can automate the billing for me. And then all that's handled through third parties. It takes a little while. I think one of the challenges is that it can take up to 14 days to get paid, even though you get paid same day. It's like you have to wait for all these process things. You can pay an addition, you can pay like a 1% fee.
Get paid immediately.
Yeah, but when you're talking, when you're talking in the tens of thousands of dollars and they want a 1.5 to 3% fee to get paid immediately, it's like I can wait. Like I've built up enough buffer where like you're not getting $300 from me just for doing nothing, for giving me my money quicker. I think that's I've been fortunate enough to be able to work I worked full time and built up enough of a cushion where I'm not like a 30-day wait period even isn't gonna crush me on anything. I'm actually the goal is to always have it like at least 3 months of income sitting in a personal bank account just in case it needs to get filtered or changed anywhere. So that's like the ideal scenario.
Yeah. Well, cash flow is, all small businesses worry about cash flow, and you always want to make sure that you've got enough cash. You run out of cash, your business is, gone. But you've got a buffer, so that's all that matters. So,
and I have very low overhead. It's like it's a few things. A lot of stuff I don't need. It's just like nice to haves. But a very low overhead as a freelance designer. It's some software and it's actually just software.
Yeah, software is
hardware too, but
there's a software. There's some software out there that I've heard about in, like trends. Like one of the trends that I've heard about, they've got this new AI trend and this, that's going on out there, and everybody wants to, have all their stuff look like AI. And there's a tool out there. It's called Midjourney, a Midjourney tool that makes everything look like fantasy and everything like that, all the designs and everything. Do you know anything about that, or am I just stupid?
No, yeah. So actually the logo that I just showed you, the Cloud9 logo, was my first attempt at using Midjourney a little bit to explore what was possible for logo design, because I had trouble. I knew that I wanted to convey this idea of like an angel type character. I was really struggling to draw the face, and I wanted to get something quickly. So I created something in Midjourney that would give me the basics of it so I could sell it to the client. But really it was just the face. And then I ended up selling them with that idea, and then redrew the whole thing in a better way. So it was an interesting use of the technologies. What it really was fantastic for was creating multiple characters very quickly, so we could show different types of ethnicities and try to create like an inclusive brand that way. So we did like a person of color, and there's plans to expand the brand to be 4 or more people as needed. And then something like Midjourney is really great because it lets me create a very basic template very quickly, rather than me it's like doing it this way, or it's me going through and finding a bunch of images and creating a fake person through a collage and then designing them that way. It's a very powerful tool. I don't think that a lot of people really know how to use it. Like I don't know the best way to use it. It's great for concept art. It's really interesting to put in a couple of your ideas and get something kicked back out to you, see if it has legs. I know Don shared some stuff with me for Star Wars last night. Don, I didn't respond back to you, but Like that's really fun too. Like I've just always wanted to see a samurai with a lightsaber, or an astronaut with duck wings or something like that. So you can get like these fun amalgamations and see like where there's potential for IP. And I think that's really cool. And whereas as I use it as a designer is in instances like with this recent design, like I couldn't draw this face, couldn't figure out what this face should look like. And I found I typed in symmetrical angel face. And then I forget what the exact prompt was, but it gave me a bunch. I kept going, cycling through, and what I ended up creating was sort of like this mix of several different characters, but she ended up being really unique. So it was cool to be able to build that way, and then create something totally unique and ownable from that. So it's very powerful. I think I'll see myself using it sparingly. It depends how creative the client wants to be. Most of the time I can draw on the computer freehand with the mouse very, very fluidly, but some more complicated designs, that's where the tool becomes really powerful, and it just replaces photoshopping and saves a lot of time, because otherwise I'd have to Photoshop these ideas together.
Well, the thing is, the only, I guess you would say the only type of design that I really know is like systematic, and that's where everything is the same. You repeat like a Marilyn Monroe picture that repeats itself, or a series of That's the only thing. That's the only thing that I could actually do as far as design goes. That's the only thing that I'm just I don't have the ability to be. Well, design is art and science, and you've got to know both. I think I've got the science. I just don't have the art. I just don't have the art. So
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, it's a craft, and it's something that you can get better at for sure. Like you can work at it and labor over it, and if your interest is if you stick with it. I've known a lot of people that have not stuck with design. I'm one of the few people that I know that started in design 10, 15 years ago that's still doing it, or still doing pretty much the same thing, where other people have either moved on or leveled up into like more managing positions, but they don't actually get in the weeds with it anymore. But I've always liked being in the weeds. I like the craft of it. So that's very appealing to me. So when these new tools like AI come up, my ears perk up, and I'm like, well, how can this like propel me into like making things more fun, more exciting, like for a client? Like how come like that Cloud9 logo I think is really fun and exciting, because I've never seen anything like it, and it's perfect for this sort of Wild West cannabis age we're living in, where everyone's going to be competing. So a really fun brand is going to stand out over somebody who just slaps something together and is just trying to sell weed. There's a lot more potential. Like it's like I've tried to approach it like with the idea of a Starbucks in mind, where they've got this, it kind of feels a little bit like it, and that you've got this identifiable character that can be put on all sorts of material that then becomes promotional. And if once New Jersey's regulations change in a few years, they could franchise, and they could have something that's really like ready to be built out into a bigger brand. Right now, the New Jersey regulations, I guess you'd say, prevent franchising for a few years. So it's like setting these businesses up for success, where this is going to work for you now. It's going to be expandable as you go down the road too.
Right. All right. So let's play the game, underrated, overrated. It's part of this series. I always ask these questions, and these are your just perceptions of these brands. I'm just going to say, some brands, and whether you think they're underrated or overrated, just how you feel about the brand, and you can give the reasons and everything. We're not hating on anybody here. We're just,
I think in the interest of time, I'll just try and be direct in my feelings towards them based on what perception is based.
So like Apple, is it underrated or overrated?
Probably. What are they valued at? More than $2 trillion? I'd say they're probably right where they should be. Probably I don't know. I can't live without them. So to me, they're always going to be underrated. The technology. I just got this new laptop. I can't believe like my previous laptop was 5 years old, and the speed, the difference is unbelievable. So I'm like, this, I can't believe I was missing this. So if you're coming from like a place where you're working with older technology and you upgraded this stuff, it's like, well, you can never go back. So in some ways, I'd say maybe underrated, overrated in their ecosystem. Like you've got to do everything. It's like, yeah, that's, you don't need to do that. Like you don't need to be on like have every single device connected, but underrated in the fact that their technology is all really designed to be like well loved by the consumer.
It's cutting edge.
Yeah. And it really, yeah, I love the feeling of using it. So it's hard to put a real value to that, but I'd say I can't live without it. So, or I can't work with that because I don't want to work on a PC. It's just, it's not all formulated to be as considered, because PCs are all mishmashed together with 100 different companies selling you different software. You could say the Windows operating system is an operating system, but then you've got the Mac ecosystem where everything is talking to each other. Everything is designed to work well together, and you're going to get the same experience across all of your devices with very few hiccups and a lot of polish. So,
okay, what about Walmart? I mean, as far as their brand goes, their branding goes, I've noticed that none of the retailers, I don't care whether you're talking about Sears or Target or whatever, or even Amazon, they just don't seem to have strong brands. And maybe you can give me some insight into why that's so.
yeah, I think that the retail aspect, the nature of retail makes that difficult because they have so many products to sell and they're not really, I think it's hard to say, like, you come to us for one thing. So Apple, you come to them for the ecosystem, you come for them for the design. Walmart, you come to them for the savings. So when you're speaking to the consumer, you have to be speaking to everyone. And when you're speaking to everyone, you kind of get lost unless you're really talking about something specific. So
that's a great
Apple. Yeah, Apple talks to designers, specifically design-minded people. Walmart talks to people who who care about the savings. So that becomes very impersonal and very, very dollars focused. And they have a lot of brands within their company that they sell. So they kind of need to be an umbrella and need to speak to everyone without really speaking to anyone specifically. It's very what would you say, economy focused? Like,
well,
speaking to a specific type of,
I think I like the difference between a branded house and a house of brands.
Well, yes,
Walmart's kind of like a house of brands.
Whereas Target, actually, they own their own brands, but they sell other brands. So they've got Goodfellow, which I'm familiar with. So you walk in there and they've got a Goodfellow station, and that's all their in-house brand. I don't know exactly how it works, but they have a subdivision within their main corporate business that makes other brands, which is really cool. They've got one for kids, and that's called Pillow Fort, and it's like, they're really fun. And they've got one called the Sun Squad, and that was all like, they came up with all this branded stuff just for the summer. It was like inflatables and tubes. And Pillow Fort's all kid stuff. It's all plushy and really fun for like fun learning toys for kids. Then Goodfellow, and they even have it for women, but I forget the women's name. They change them out seasonally sometimes too, but Goodfellow is stuck around. And it's all very natural, organic looking, basic tees and pants and stuff that's very, very middle of the road, nothing like high fashion. They're not chasing trends. There's not a lot of crazy graphic tees and like different things. Like it's not a hodgepodge. It's very more curated, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Traditional.
Yeah, yes, very much so.
Right. Well, listen, we've talked a long time, and so we're gonna have to close this out. So it's been great, and I've loved every moment of it. I love talking about branding. Oh man, do I love talking about branding. It probably shows. So where do you see Damn Good Brand in 5 years? What are you going to be doing?
The plan is to scale a little bit. I don't know how much it's gonna scale. I would love to have more retainer type clients. I'd love to have a bit of a focus on industry like the cannabis sector, for example, where I can cater to one or two specific industries more, and so then I can then pitch to them. But right now, everything is referral. The immediate problems are not problems, but the immediate things to overcome right now are things with my son and our sort of situation, like where I have a home office, but then like what can I do consistently, maintaining consistently, like can I consistently get the same hours every week? So I know that I can get certain types of work done. Then if I can do that, then I can do the next step, which is start to pitch and find clients that need work on a regular basis. So I don't have to be quite so reliant on referrals and new work all the time. And that's really important. So I'd say in 5 years, it would be to have increased revenues for sure, but maybe have one or two employees on call, like not necessarily full time, but I'd love to have people that I can rely on regularly with and have enough regular, consistent work that we can have a very comfortable life. Right now, life is very comfortable, and the revenue stream is consistent enough that we can maintain our lifestyle. But we've also got plans for a second child, so we want to be able to, we have to scale the business in order to scale our house. We need a new house, so we need to scale our lifestyle a little bit. So it's all about just sort of maintaining the balance we've created. But I'd really do like the flexibility I have. So I don't want to give up too much control. I don't want to grow to a point where I've got to worry about salaries too much right now. In 5 years, I'd like to be in a place where I'm not considering going back to a full-time position. It's not even on the playing field. Like right now, sometimes it tickles the back of my head where I'm like, oh, maybe I might need to work again at a more traditional business at some point. But so far, freelance has shown to be where I really fit in comfortably. So being able to scale that as naturally as possible is going to be the goal.
Well,
organic growth is going to be really important. Sorry to cut you off.
it's okay. Organic growth is good. The thing is after I started my business, I knew I couldn't go back to a corporation. I just
Yeah.
It's just like I can't go back. I mean, I've crossed that threshold, and I can't go back. I mean, I can't. I'm in control for better or for worse, and I don't want to go back and lose that control. And so
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and if I can find the right people who want to come on the journey with me, and the everything feels natural and good, and then that's going to be the path I take. I also have plans for expanding into teaching and possibly courses, and I've maybe like a YouTube channel. So there's lots of opportunity as a freelancer to make moves, and I'd love to create like my own IP. I think that's where like the real value comes into play, like something that's ownable that can be either licensed out or created and produced to consumer. Ideally, in an ideal world, I'd make content that I want to make, and I'd have just patrons that pay me because they like the work that I do, right? So that would be ideal. Like I just make what I want to make when I want to make it. People throw money at me for it, which is cool. And that's the dream. Very few people get to do that. But I think continuing to work on Damn Good Brand and building up the relationships, like I think it's going to be natural that something comes out of it that is close to that, where it's like a course or a book or some sort of an educational tool. Maybe it's a product in some regard, but it's going to come down to finding the right person to work with and the right time too. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. I love making logos, and that's something I've always fallen back on. So that'll always be consistent. And I always laugh about never really retiring. I've talked to some designers and mentors who are are like, they're advanced in age and they've still working and they don't have plans to retire. And I kind of like that idea that they like their craft. It's like a woodworker. Someone who's always worked with wood, they're just going to work with wood. Like, I love making logos. I'm always going to make little pictures. So,
Okay. Well, listen, the great thing about doing something you love is you don't have to worry about retiring. Because when you're retired, you're still going to want to do something creative because it feels,
I just have, make sure my sanity's there, so I'm not making weird shit.
Well, you never know.
missing the client's target. Like we talked about a son, and I end up giving them something that's unrelated. But no, it's like, that's not really a worry. I'm sure my wife will tell me I'm not.
I've just
enough.
I've missed client targets before, and I've been completely coherent. So it happens.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
All right. Well, listen. Thank you for spending time with us, Jim. I mean, I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And I'm really inspired by the work that you do and everything like that. I love branding. I love everything about it, and I love talking about it. And I appreciate you spending time with us. And best of luck. And I hope to stay in touch with you.
Yeah, Shelly, Don, both of you, thank you so much. This was really fun. It's really nice to stretch my my speaking skills a little bit, and just you hear about things all the time, you take them all in, but until you really start to talk about them, you sort of maybe you realize them. Maybe you knew more than you thought you did. Just being able to talk about it and see what the opinions of others are is really great. Because I work in a bubble a lot, so being able to bounce the ideas off of people isn't as frequent as I like. So this has been exceptionally fun. I really enjoyed it, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, listen, thank you again. And for all the viewers and everything, we appreciate you dropping in. If you could smash that subscribe button or that like button, we'd really, really appreciate it. We're trying to, build up a series of people here that like our videos. And until next time, stay stoic. Talk to you later.